This is Jack
Hi.
Horak from Tango, and this is my monthly video newsletter for January of 2021. And I have one of my favorite nonprofit people on the Zoom call with me, Susan Sadecki, whom I've known for many years, and she is the CEO of the Main Street Community Foundation. And in a minute, I'm going to let her introduce herself more formally. But what I want to do today is have Susan tell us what it was like, boots on the ground, dealing with the crisis that COVID dropped on us almost a year ago. And we can listen to what she says and we can all learn some lessons from her own experiences, I think. So Susan, with that said, why don't I turn it over to you and you can tell us about your foundation and then tell us how you dealt with this. How was it on day one when the hammer fell on you?
Sure. Thank you so much. Gosh, what a time that was. So hello, everyone. My name is Susan. I just started my 14th year at the Main Street Community Foundation. And for those of you who don't know about community foundations, we actually serve local communities by working with donors who want to leave permanent charitable endowments that we will steward, that will provide grants to our local nonprofit organizations and fulfill charitable goals primarily on the local level. So we serve the communities in Connecticut of Bristol, Burlington, Plainville, Plymouth, Southington, and Woolcott. So really we're in the central Connecticut region. And when I think back, Jack, to March, I can tell you exactly where I was because I was getting my hair done and getting my hair cut and texting my staff telling them, I think tomorrow's our last day in the office. What I'm hearing is the governor's going to shut down the state and we have to be prepared to work from home.
Wow,
It was
that's
almost,
that's a big. I mean that's probably not the kind of thing you've got in your budget, right? That's a big change. Dan,
yeah, it was a shocking, I think,
yeah,
thing. And then I think most of us thought, oh, all right, okay, we'll be home for a couple weeks. Okay, we'll just pack up for a couple weeks and all this will blow over and we'll go back to our life as usual. I don't think any of us knew on that day what really was ahead of us. So as a community foundation, we're immediately thinking about, okay, we're preparing for our annual meeting. It's our 25th anniversary year. I have
great.
6
I forgot
staff,
about that. You're right. You were going to
right?
have your gala last September.
We were going to have a big event in September,
Right,
right? So it's
right.
it's our 25th anniversary. We have a worldwide pandemic. Our governor's about to shut us down, right? We're all going to go into our homes and be as safe as we can and to avoid contact with each other. We don't know if touching things is going to, result in a COVID case. And so as a community foundation, we're not only preparing for how we're going to carry out our work remotely, how are we going to protect our own staff?
Right.
Do we need a supply of PPE in our own office? Can we touch each other's files? Do we need gloves? How much hand sanitizer do we need? Because obviously there's a few of us that ultimately would have to come into the office in order to carry out our work. Technology needs. Not all of my team members had laptops. We had to invest in technology so that all of
Yep,
our staff members could work from home. Not a budgeted item, as you mentioned. So,
right.
there were many things to be thought about when I think back to that moment. Wow.
Well, and that's just on top of, well, I'm sure the hardships, right? In the community, the disruption to people in their lives comes finds its way to your door on top of all this.
Right. So
And and that you I guess, how did you deal with triage that? How did it play out for you and your board?
and that's actually how it felt. That was a great word, triaging, and that is what I felt like we were doing because
Yeah,
we're triaging our own needs as a small business,
right.
and then we're obviously putting all of our communication strategies in place to communicate with our established partners. So who were our established partners in those early days? And thank God that we were a 25-year-old community foundation, because we already had those partnerships established. So who do we reach out to? The local United Ways that cover our communities, the chambers of commerce, big partners, right? They were staying in touch with the state. They were hosting all kinds of
Wow.
Zoom meetings. We were just talking about it earlier with my staff about how, we felt like we were on Zoom meetings every day, just trying to gather as much information as we can, not only on what was happening at the state level, but what was happening across our country in our field. How are our community foundation colleagues, dealing with this? The Council on Foundations was a huge resource. The Connecticut Council for Philanthropy, huge resource. But what I learned from that experience is how important relationships are.
Okay.
And that as a community foundation, you're right, we are already an anchor institution in the communities we serve. And those relationships that have been built over that time really came into play at that moment.
Well, there's a lot of wisdom in that, Susan, CEO kind of wisdom. Seriously, in the sense that if someone is going to get deeply involved in this wonderful field of philanthropy, and it is a wonderful field, what you just said is like business school 101, I would think, right? I mean, it's having those relationships, and also just like one quick comment, like I'll be 67, right? And I'm not a Luddite, but the technology just blows me away. And the connectivity that you mentioned, the way you can exchange data sets with community foundations all over the country and learn from them, and they can learn from you. It's like this spontaneous network of connectivity of people in the field coming together to keep us together, to make the country work. It's phenomenal stuff. The
Absolutely.
nonprofit sector really shown what it can do, I think, in the last year.
And my team, they were rock stars, right? So
Yeah.
so our administrative services manager, she made sure she became the queen of Zoom. She learned everything she needed to learn about how do you operate this technology so
Yep.
that we could also offer it to nonprofits and other community coalitions that weren't, we would host our Zoom line. We would say, you want to do a Zoom meeting? Julie can set it up for you. Don't worry, you
Awesome.
can use ours, because that's what community foundations do. They are a true community partner. When I think back to that moment as well, collaboration, obviously, partnerships, huge thing. Flexibility, with our funding partners across the country. We took a pledge. Many of us took an actual pledge and said, in this moment, throughout this national crisis, we are going to listen to our grantees immediately. We are going to eliminate all of those burdensome things that we funders sometimes think are important to our work, and they are in some regard.
I'll come back to that in a minute, but go ahead. Yeah.
Good, and I think, again, we took that pledge to eliminate unnecessary burdens, to look at the importance of unrestricted operating. Oh my gosh, right? For a community foundation who has
Yep.
very specific grant cycles and how we do things and policies and guidelines. You know what? That playbook went right out the window because we needed to respond in a way that we had never responded before. And as I said to our board of directors many times, each time we were approving a set of unrestricted operating grants, I said to our board, these are the most important grants this community foundation has ever made. Not that we hadn't made unrestricted operating grants in the past.
Right.
We had, not at this volume. The volume of unrestricted operating grants we made, pretty crazy.
Well, that's amazing. I want to come back to a couple points you said. One is what I'll describe as the necessity is the mother of invention point. That is, you realize it was a triage situation and you had to get liquidity. You had to get cash out to people everywhere, and there were things you found that you could eliminate. And yeah, every organization has those, Susan. I mean, if they evolved in the law firm I was at, we do it because it's, well, I mean, but it's a good reminder that there probably are things that we can improve all around us when we go forward. please respond to that. But secondly, the unrestricted money aspect of it. Yeah, that's a big deal.
I mean,
I mean, it's the flip side. I love donor intent as a principle, but it can be detrimental in certain situations.
it can be. So, in 2020, in our 25th year of existence, the Community Foundation made grants totaling over $2 million. Now, we are a $53 million asset size community foundation
Yep.
as of 12/31.
Yep.
Over $2 million in grants is a lot of money. The other partner who came into play during the grant making component of this were our donor advised funds. They were critical.
Yeah,
We have
good point.
we don't have a lot of donor advised funds at our community foundation, but we have enough. And these are donors who we keep very connected with the needs of our local community. So they were very attentive when we called on them and said, listen, this is what's going on in Bristol, or this is what's going on in Southington. Can you help? Will you recommend an unrestricted grant for this? And the answers were 100%, yes, we can.
Wow, that's really cool. That is really neat. I mean, and I mean, I'm presuming everyone listening knows what a donor advised fund is, but if you don't, in a sentence, it's instead of creating your own private foundation, which is burdensome, you can go to a community foundation like the community Main Street and have a separate fund set up in your name that you can use as a vehicle to make your contributions. And it's a wonderful way to do it because all the administrative work is on the foundation, and you just get to basically designate where you'd like the money to go out of your grant, out of your fund. So it's a cool instrument for people. Wow. Well, I mean, I applaud you. I remember when this happened, I think you and I were talking about doing something together, and I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, how are I'm at home, but how are people in your position who have a business to run? And that's what you did. You had a business that you had to figure out how you're going to run under circumstances that you never saw, and at the same time meet the needs of your customers, so to speak. The people in your community.
It's interesting because community foundations, like all businesses, right, have lots of policies and procedures, and you try to prepare for various scenarios that could impact your business, right?
Yeah.
A natural disaster, some other type of, internet goes down, some other type of business continuity plan, right? No one had what happens when you have a worldwide pandemic and your governor shuts your state down and you literally cannot go to work? None of us had a playbook for that. Well, let me tell you, again, because of those relationships that were already established, the fact that I could just pick up the phone and call, United Way of West Central Connecticut. I mean, Donna and I probably talked every other day in that first month from March to April. And then we had weekly calls, and because you're coordinating funding sources as well, because we were getting calls from various nonprofits for various things, and we wanted to be sure we were covering all the bases. We also were integral in some of these really rapid response initiatives that needed to happen to accommodate first responders. So for example, the Southington YMCA, they became an emergency child care provider. And that was before, the Office of Early Childhood had worked out all the details. They knew that they needed to prepare. They worked with the local health system in that community who knew that they needed a place for children to be cared for so first responders could go to work. But they needed funding for that, right? There's a cash flow issue. You need to pay people to come in and watch these children. And so we provided generous grant funding for that. So there were a lot of initiatives that, that maybe they don't hit the paper. But let me tell you, these are creative solutions on the local level. And we were honored and humbled at the same time to be a part of that process. I
believe wholeheartedly in having power and authority over decisions like this pushed down to the lowest possible points in the community where they can be handled. And so you end up with a board like yours and people like you who are an integral part of the community. You know, you're like an organ that keeps the heart pumping, you know. And you're right, a grant like you just described to keep the first responders able to work is not going to make the front line, you know, headlines in the philanthropy chronicle of philanthropy, but it kept the system working. It enabled, it was a necessary part of keeping the system working, and you provided that part, and that's pretty darn cool.
Yeah, I mean, and we collaborated with other partners. You know,
Yeah.
there were you know, manufacturing companies who were turning into face mask creators, right?
Yep.
And so, you know, we would get a call from, let's say, the Community Foundation of Greater New Britain that said, "Hey, can you partner with us on this? Can you provide some grant funding? This is really critical right now." My board, shout out to them. They
Good.
were amazing. That first 3 months, we probably had weekly board meetings. I mean, I remember having a board meeting once on a Friday night and then on a Saturday because there were just certain things. And we didn't want to throw all of our procedures out the window, right? We still
Right.
wanted to do proper governance that you
Right.
taught us, Jack, proper governance. And so everybody needed to be at the table. Everybody needed to be part of those decisions to make sure that everybody was in agreement, right or wrong, that this is how we were going to march forward. And they were amazing. I had an amazing executive committee. They got the brunt of it because they would usually get
Yeah.
the first the first
Yeah.
line of, you know, do you think this is something the community foundation should engage in? And 9 times out of 10, or 10 times out of 10, I really should say, the answer was always yes, 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 yes. This is what we need to do right now.
Yeah. God bless them. And that's just those are really heartwarming stories because they show how in certain circumstances the best can be brought out of people, and it's awfully nice to be part of that in a formal way by being a tax exempt nonprofit community organization, and that brings meaning to your lives and lives to the members of your community. um, and we need more examples like that, you know, in today's world. But the nonprofit sector was awesomeness in this crisis as I observed it, Susan. You know, I believe in it wholeheartedly, as you know. And when I hear stories like yours, it's like, there you go. This is the reason why I've always worked to support the nonprofit sector, is because take this institution in central Connecticut and multiply it by all the others around the country, all doing the same thing. None of them making it to the front pages, but they're all an integral part in holding the culture together, which is, you know, what the third sector should do. You know, go back to Tocqueville, you know, voluntary associations and communities coming together to solve community problems is just a phenomenon that I've always endorsed.
And I think bolstering, you know, our local nonprofits at that moment and throughout 2020, again, was so critical and
Sure.
essential, right? Yes. Do we have nonprofits who weren't able to deliver their services in the normal way? Did they have to help recreate themselves? Did it take money to do that? Absolutely. We were right there to help fund those
Yep.
creative solutions. But we are also there to help fund those nonprofits that, you know, may not have the huge rainy day fund, but guess what? They still have to pay rent.
Yep.
And that trickles down, right? Because if they pay their rent, then that person that owns that building,
It
right?
pays the mortgage.
Exactly, who's paying
Right.
the mortgage doesn't have to get a deferral. I mean,
Yeah.
there's just such a trickle down effect here. Again, people need to view these nonprofits, they're businesses too, and they have
Yeah.
bills to pay. And sometimes, you know, when you hear someone say, "Oh, you know, it's really important. I want to support that nonprofit, but I don't want to pay for salaries."
Yeah,
Mm,
no, no. This is, I mean, the
yeah,
economic rate of return on your community foundation over the last year has been massive. Think of it that way. But yet hard to put your finger on each little instance where things were kept alive because of you. But if you add it all up, it was massive. Well, look, Susan, I would urge you to keep thinking about this. Maybe once this is really over, we could talk some more about it, because these are great stories to memorialize, is I guess is what I'm saying. Your memories of this time, I guess we're preserving a little of them in this interview here, right? Are
yes.
worth keeping around to become part of the history of the organization. You know what this year was like.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Jack. And, I remember talking to a couple of the founders of our community foundation during this past year and really thanking them, right? Because if they had never established this community foundation in 1995, we're a fairly new, right? We're still in
Yeah.
our adolescence, a fairly newer community foundation. Who would have been present at that moment to bolster the nonprofit community? I don't know. I feel like the community foundation was established for this pandemic. And I know that sounds dramatic, but I feel like
I get it.
no one
Yeah.
could have predicted this, yet we were able to quickly respond with resources, with professional staff who checked in on our if we didn't hear from a nonprofit, we checked in with them. How you doing? What do you need?
Yeah.
Because they were so paralyzed by what was happening that it sometimes it's hard to think. Or if you're a mostly all volunteer nonprofit, how do you
Yeah.
where do you start? And where we could provide guidance on where they could start, so
Great stories. Well,
it really was
keep thinking about it, and yeah, and we'll talk some more about it, because I think there's a lot to be learned from what you said today.
well, thank you for having me, Jack. I appreciate it.
Great.
And community foundation colleagues all around the United States have the same stories to tell.
Yeah,
And
that's true. It's good. It's good
you're
that,
right.
good that
We're
you're
unique. We're unique, but we're the anchor institutions of our communities for
there.
sure.
Great. Great. Well, look, you stay safe. Have a good, successful 2021, and hopefully we'll be mask free by June. That'd be nice.
Mask right here. Got to use it when I go out into the hallway.
I know. All right. You take care, Susan. Thank you
All right.
again.
Thank you
bye-bye.
so much.
You
All
bet.
right.
Yeah,
Take
bye.
care.